Genesis 30. Genesis 30. We'll get started at verse 25 tonight and finish this chapter. I think it's a pretty smooth chapter to get through. I don't think it'll take us very long. Last week was the baby war. You remember that one? That was a fun study, don't you think? The baby war. Well, that was a fun study, all right. But this week, that baby war is pretty much over. And we're going to move on to the next major life event for Jacob and his crew, his family. True, the baby war isn't completely over yet. There's still one that has to be born. I mentioned that last week quickly in passing. Benjamin still has to make his way into this world through Rachel, and that's going to be the child that would be the death of her. You know, I've heard my parents say that about me a lot when I was growing up. You're going to be the death of me. Well, it never did happen yet, but Benjamin really would be the death of Rachel. That would be the son that when she was born, it would take her life. So that's still yet to come. That's on the horizon. But tonight, the focus now shifts from the love life of Jacob, aren't you glad? The family life of Jacob to now the work life of Jacob. So I'm going to keep this introduction very short. We will go right ahead and begin reading our verses tonight and get through the rest of this chapter. Verse 25. And it came to pass, when Rachel had borne Joseph, that Jacob said to Laban, "Send me away, that I may go to my own place and to my country." Verse 26. "Give me my wives and my children, for whom I have served you, and let me go, for you know my service, which I have done for you." Jacob was 77 years old when he began working for Laban. He worked 7 years for that first wife. So 7 years, that would make him 84. You can check me on my math here, but I don't think it's been that long since I've been out of school. 84 years, he started working on that 7 years for Rachel. And so then by the time he's done and now gets to the point where he wants to leave, he's now 91 years old. 91 years old. He says there in verse 26, I've been working for you. My work speaks for itself. And when we look at chapter 31, we're going to see Jacob tell his wife Rachel that when he worked for her father Laban, he worked for him with all of his might. He cut no corners. He gave it his all. And, 14 years of hard labor, the 4 wives who wanted to keep him having babies, that has all finally worn him out, and it's time for him to retire. That's what this is. He wants to retire. He wants to move back home. Verse 27, Laban said to him, "Please stay, if I have found favor in your eyes, for I have learned by experience that the Lord has blessed me for your sake." Now, we're going to see in the next chapter that Laban is still a pagan. That's never really going to change. He worships many gods. We would call him an idolater. We'd call him polytheistic. He's not monotheistic. He doesn't serve one God. He sees through experience the reality of Yahweh, the God of Jacob. That's not necessarily going to cause him to convert. But what he does do is recognize that the blessings of God are a very real and seeable thing. And Laban has benefited from his close proximity to Jacob. If you think about it, since Jacob came into his life, he had capable help on the farm there, capable help with the livestock. He had help to increase Laban's wealth. And Jacob gave Laban tons of grandchildren. Things were going quite well in Laban's life. And in a moment of just naked, sheer honesty, Laban says, "Jacob, I realize it's because of you." You're going to see Jacob later on, I think it's in the next chapter, talk about just a little bit that Laban had before Jacob got there. Jacob, we might say, put this guy on the map. Jacob made this guy. Jacob blessed this guy because God was blessing Jacob. Those blessings that were on Jacob's life would just spill over into anyone that was around him. And that happened to be Laban. And I know we talked about this topic pretty recently. And that's because it isn't the first time that it's appeared in the book of Genesis, but here we are again. So understand that the Bible is already just, 30 chapters into Genesis, placing an emphasis on an eventuality that it wants you to know about. That eventuality is that when you are following the Lord, when your life is blessed by the Lord, that the people that get close to you in your life, they are going to experience some of the rub-off of that blessing because God is blessing you. And the closer that a person gets to you, the closer they get to that blessing from God. You can see it in people that are close to you as friends, but even more so, when you're living under the same roof as a person, well, that's for sure when you're going to get to experience some of those blessings. Even if you're an unbeliever, experience some of those blessings that just sort of spill over from the life of a believer. Now, Paul understood this same eventuality, and he uses that in 1 Corinthians chapter 7. Remember, we've talked about this one before, while of course dealing with this same topic. But in 1 Corinthians 7, verses 13 through 15, Paul uses this in that case to discuss the reasons why a Christian spouse might stay with an unbelieving spouse, even though that unbelieving spouse does not know the Lord, does not follow the Lord, and then there's that little bit of a rift within the home because of that worldview that comes from saved and not saved. And just to read that real quickly, I know you know this real well, but I just want to read through this again. Verse 13, it says, "A woman who has a husband who does not believe, if he is willing to live with her, let her not divorce him. For the unbelieving husband is sanctified by the wife, and the unbelieving wife is sanctified by the husband. Otherwise your children would be unclean, but now are they holy." So there you see Paul talking about two people, a believer and an unbeliever, that both want to stay together, right? The unbeliever, though he's not a believer, he wants to stay with the believer. And Paul said the way that works is that blessing that is on the life of a believer, and we should detail some of these things out. The list is pretty big. That blessing that is on your life as a believer, the hedge of protection, the protection of God, the provision of God, the prosperity that he'll bring to your life. Not necessarily money, but prosperity in some form. If you're like me, you got the spiritual prosperity and not the financial prosperity. But all of those blessings that come with just walking with the Lord, those unbelievers benefit from because they're living in that same home. It's kind of tough for the Lord to just pour out blessings on one person in a home and it not affect the whole home, right? I like to think of it like this. When the Lord pours out blessings into a believer's life, he doesn't just use the single spigot, but he puts a nozzle on there that sprays. And if you're close to that believer, if you're walking close to that believer as an unbeliever, that blessing, God is not stingy with it. He's willing to let you get a little bit of that on you as you rub up against those believers in your life. If nothing else, just to give you the opportunity to taste and see that the Lord is good, to experience that blessing. That's what Jacob is getting here. It works with a home. That word sanctified means set apart. That unbelieving spouse, their life gets set apart for the purposes of God because they're in that same home with the believer. But it doesn't just work in the home. We see it here in Genesis again, chapter 30. It works on the job too. Now Jacob's got this covered from both angles. He lives with Laban. So Laban's getting that blessing with Jacob being under his roof. The Lord is protecting that home. The Lord is blessing that home. But then Laban also gets it because not only is Jacob living under the roof, but Jacob is a laborer for the family business. So Jacob, that blessing that God is blessing Jacob with, that business from Laban is also benefiting from that blessing as well. So I just like to put it like this. As Christians, we really should be the absolute best workers out there. If you're the only Christian working in the company you're working for, I think you need to be the best worker there. I really do. You have got stuff in your heart that the unbelieving worker doesn't have. You should be an honest person. You should be a trustworthy person. You should be a dependable person. And when you work, you should be working with that principle from Colossians chapter 3, verse 23, that says, whatever you do, you could quote it with me, whatever you do, do it heartily as to the Lord and not to men. So that sort of cuts off the argument. Well, I would be the best worker on my job, except that my boss is a jerk. Well, Paul said in Colossians, you're not doing this for men. You're not working hard on the job because your boss is a good man and he's worthy of the benefit of your work. That's not why you're doing this. If you're working as unto the Lord, you don't worry about your jerk boss. You work as unto the Lord. You let the Lord handle what happens with that boss. Yes, he's going to be blessed by your hard work. You may hate to see a crooked man get ahead. That's what's happening to Laban. He's a jerk of a boss. He's an unfair boss. You're going to see that. But it did not stop Jacob, according to chapter 31. Did not stop him from working for Laban with all of his might. And it shouldn't stop a Christian from working on their job with all of their might as if they were doing it for the Lord, not men. Because you know what that can do, right? That can be the avenue that the Lord uses to reach that person. Now, it may not happen. And if not, that boss and what they've done with the benefit of your work, that's between them and the Lord. But Paul uses that as the same argument for the spouse that sticks with an unbelieving spouse. He says, you don't know. You might be the thing that reaches that unbelieving spouse, right? So it's the same in a home. It's the same in a workplace, a work environment. What I'm saying is you work for the Lord with all your heart. Whatever you're doing, you do it for the Lord. You know, you can be a ministry worker for the Lord. That's a lot easier. But I guess what we don't think about very often is being a plumber for the Lord. Right? Being an electrician for the Lord. Being a guy that works on land phone lines for the Lord. You know, whatever you do that for the Lord. And through that, the Lord gives you a unique opportunity, not only to reach the people you work with, your coworkers, but to reach the people whose homes you get to go in as workers, as a plumber, as a landline installer. Whatever you do, you can do it for the Lord, as long as you don't get fired. You have to figure that part out. But listen, anything you do, you can do it for the Lord. And bad bosses, we'll just say it like this as we look at this passage and what Jacob has done for a really bad boss. We'll just say it like this. Bad bosses are not good excuses for good Christians to be bad workers. Need me to say that again? Bad bosses are not good excuses for good Christians to be bad workers. That's no excuse. You do that job for the Lord. The Lord will see it, the Lord will honor it, and the Lord will deal with that boss. Hopefully, the Lord will reach that boss. Verse 28, then he said, all right, you want to leave? I need you to stay. I really want you to stay. Jacob, you're my rabbit's foot. You're my lucky charm. If you're still in my life, that blessing from God is still going to be there. I need you to stick around. So he says there's this, verse 28, name me your wages and I will give it. See, that's the great thing about working for the Lord. In whatever you're doing, you do it as if you're doing it for the Lord, because you do that for about 5 years or so. You work for that boss. You do it with all of your might. You do it with all of your integrity. You do that job as if you're doing it for the Lord himself. And then after about 5 years, you threaten to quit, just like Jacob. And then they say, okay, we want you to stay, name your wage. And then you say, all right, I'll stick around for $60 an hour. And when you get your approval for $60 an hour, you make sure you spread the word about how these Wednesday night services have enriched your life spiritually. All right? So Laban probably should not have done what he's about to do. Jacob, I get the understanding that Jacob wanted to give a short notice. Kind of like one of those quick 2-week notices. Laban, time to go. His requests were very simple. Let me take my family. That's all I want. Just a clean break. Laban says, stick around, name your wages, And I think that was a bit of a mistake for Laban because he wants him to stay so bad that he tells him to name his price, and I think that got Jacob thinking. That's the last thing you want, is Jacob thinking. Because if he's thinking, he's scheming. And you're going to see things change. He's going to say, okay, I will stick around a while. In fact, he's going to stick around for 6 more years before he goes. And he's got a plan for now what he wants to walk away with after those 6 years. Verse 29, so Jacob said to him, you know how I have served you and how your livestock has been with me. 30, for what you had before I came was little. Okay, it is this chapter. What you had before I came was little, and it has increased to a great amount. The Lord has blessed you since my coming. And now when shall I also provide for my own house? First off, I love the fact that Jacob just makes sure that Laban understands very clearly that his blessing has come from the Lord. His blessing has come from the Lord. He points it out again. The Lord has blessed you because I came into this situation. Right? So he doesn't let that become like the lucky charm or the rabbit's foot. No, this is God blessing because of Jacob in that situation. And verse 31, he said, what shall I give you? And Jacob said, you shall not give me anything. Well, except this. If you will do this one thing for me, I will again feed and keep your flocks. And this is him committing to, he's going to be there for another 6 years. He's going to stick around for 6 years. I'll feed your flocks. I'll keep doing what I'm doing. But here's what I want. Verse 32. Let me pass through all your flock today, removing from there all the speckled and spotted sheep, and all the brown ones among the lambs, and the spotted and speckled among the goats, and these shall be my wages. Okay, so in the Middle East back then, and still to this day, the way this works is that sheep are predominantly solid white, right? And goats are predominantly black or brown, solid colors. You'd only occasionally see, sort of like a genetic freak of nature where you would occasionally see a sheep or a goat that was spotted or striped or speckled in some way. Those are genetic, genetic minorities. This is called Wendell's Law. Have you ever heard of this? Wendell's Law. It's a study on DNA that basically looks at the observation of DNA regularities. These are just things that we see, like laws of nature. They just sort of happen. This is the way that it goes. Sheep are usually white. Every now and then you have the black sheep of the family. A lot of you laughed. That tells me a lot. Tells me a lot about your homes. Sometimes you see a brown sheep, right? Rare. But usually you just see a white sheep. Usually when you have a goat, you have a solid color. Verse 33, so my righteousness will answer for me in time to come, when the subject of my wages comes before you. Everyone that is not speckled and spotted among the goats and brown among the lambs will be considered stolen if it is with me. So Jacob says, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you, how about if we do this? You agree to this. I'm going to give you the solid white sheep. I'm going to give you the solid colored goats, but any sheep or goats among the livestock that are spotted, speckled, or striped, I'm going to take. Now that should be a no-brainer for Laban, because there would not be many. If they went out this very day, as Jacob is saying, and Jacob walked among the livestock, and he picked out the spotted, speckled, and striped, he would be leaving with very little. And Laban would be keeping very much, right? So the only problem is that as Jacob is trying now to walk away with a retirement, this is essentially him trying to cash in his 401k. This is his retirement now. Laban started this. Laban didn't let him just up and leave. And now he's got a plan. This is what he wants for his retirement. He wants to take this with him. And the only problem is that his boss, Laban, is going to say one thing and do another. Have you ever worked for a boss like that? Say one thing and do another. I know we could all amen that. Verse 34, and Laban said, "Oh, that it were according to your word." I hope that's the way it works out. That's the way I want it to work out. He's saying, verse 35. Now watch what Laban does, right? He says, yeah, let's do that. I hope it works out that way. But look at what he does. Verse 35. He removed that day the male goats that were speckled and spotted, all the female goats that were speckled and spotted, every one that had some white in it, and all the brown ones among the lambs, and gave them into the hands of his sons. Verse 36, then he put 3 days' journey between himself and Jacob fed the rest of Laban's flocks. So you saw what he did. He hides away all of the spotted, speckled, and striped sheep and goats. He gets out there before Jacob, and he gets them all, and he gives them to his family, and they take him out a 3-day journey, and I don't know, hide him behind some bushes or something. So Laban is once again trying to trick Jacob. Talk about a bad boss. Talk about an unfair boss. Look at what Jacob has done for this man. And this man knows the benefit of Jacob in his life. And yet, at every opportunity, Laban is trying to trick this guy and stick him with the raw end of the deal. So Jacob's going to go out there. He's going to see what happened. There's no speckled, spotted, and striped sheep or goats. They're all just mysteriously gone. So he's going to know that Laban is up to Laban's old tricks. And I guess this is where you could say Jacob determines in his mind, it's on. It's on. He wants a con battle. If he wants to try to trick me out of such a meager offering to take away with, then well, I'll just get in the game. And so now Jacob is in the game. And it really is a big statement about the lack of integrity and purity in the heart of Laban, because he is not just sending Jacob away empty-handed. Jacob's going to be leaving with his daughters and his grandchildren. And this guy is so stingy that he's not willing to give them that little bit of boost financially, that little bit of help with food and possession. And he's basically just trying to send all of them, even his own daughters and grandkids, out empty-handed. But Jacob has only begun to fight. Verse 37. Now Jacob took for himself rods of green poplar or sticks. These are sticks from trees. Rods of green poplar and of the almond and chestnut trees, peeled white strips in them, and exposed the white which was in the rod. So are you with me so far? You understand what happened there? Don't get lost. This gets confusing. It really does. It's a strange story. I don't know if it's stranger than the baby war, but it is strange. So he takes these green sticks, little sticks, twigs with green bark on them, and he peels stripes in the bark and exposes the white of the wood inside the core of those sticks. So he makes these sticks and he makes them striped. Verse 38, and the rods, the sticks, which he had peeled, he set before the flocks in the gutters, in the watering troughs, where the flocks came to drink, so that they should conceive when they came to drink. Confused yet? So these sticks that he put these stripes in now, he throws them in the watering troughs. He throws them in these areas where these sheep and these goats are going to come and drink. And in his thinking, what's going to happen is that they're going to see these striped sticks, and that's going to inspire them to conceive. And when they conceive, through prenatal suggestion, they're going to conceive spotted, striped, and speckled lambs and kids. You know, baby goats, not human kids. Now, that's what he thinks is going to happen. Is that possible? Is that a real thing? Prenatal suggestion? Hang with me. Verse 39. So the flocks conceived before the rods. So it happened. They come up to where these striped sticks are in the water. They drink the water. They conceive. And the flocks brought forth streaked, speckled, and spotted. Incredible. Verse 40, then Jacob separated the lambs and made the flocks face toward the streaked and all the brown in the flock of Laban. But he put his own flocks by himself, and he did not put them with Laban's flocks. So this actually seemed to work. I mean, it worked out the way Jacob thought it was going to work. They see that striped stick, and they have striped, spotted, and speckled lambs and kids. And what does Jacob do right away when they're born? Remember, he's sticking around for 6 years, so this happens for quite some time. It doesn't happen instantly. There's the incubation period and all that, right? This is just normal life stuff. We understand that. What does he do right away when those spotted, speckled, and striped lambs and kids are born? He takes them and he hides them away. So he understood for sure what Laban has done. And these new ones that are born, he's got a stash, he's got a cache. He's hiding them away so that Laban can't steal them. Verse 41, and it came to pass, whenever the stronger livestock conceived, that Jacob placed the rods before the eyes of the livestock in the gutters, that they might conceive among the rods. Verse 42, but when the flocks were feeble, he did not put them in. So the feebler were Laban's, and the stronger Jacob's. Verse 43, thus the man, Jacob, became exceedingly prosperous and had large flocks, female and male servants, and camels and donkeys. This Jacob, he is as sharp as a tack. He really is. He understands after some time, wait a second, I can do this selectively. And I can take a look at that mother sheep or that mother goat as they come up, and if it looks strong and healthy, I'll throw the sticks down, the striped sticks, and they'll produce a spotted, speckled, or striped baby, and I'll take that. But if it's a weak mama, if she looks sick or thin or unhealthy, well, I'll let that one produce young for Laban's side. And through this, remember, Laban could have let him go with just a handful of livestock, and he was still sitting on top of the world with all of his livestock and the wealth that would bring back in that time period. But instead now, Jacob has selectively done this, and the entire flock, the entire livestock of Laban has been weakened. So what do we make of this story? How much time do I got? All right, well, I got time. What do we make of this story? Is the Bible indeed teaching us prenatal suggestion? Now, that's not completely foreign to our world today. There are some people that believe that if a mother, as she's conceiving or as that baby is in the womb and developing, if the mother will look at certain things, that can cause the development of the baby to be influenced by those certain things that the mother looks at. There are some people that maybe believe that. It's not a very common type of, well, I don't think you can really call it science. Philosophy, we'll say. It's not a very common thing. I don't know, maybe that's what happened with Esau. Maybe his mom was looking at a bunch of apes, and then prenatal suggestion, Esau was born and he looked just like an ape. I don't know. No, that's not what's happening here, of course. This isn't prenatal suggestion. And you can't really understand why this all worked with the whole striped stick thing until you get to the next chapter and you find out the truth behind it, and you find out that what Jacob was doing, he was doing after he had heard from the Lord about this issue. The Lord had already spoken to Jacob. The Lord started with this: the spotted, the speckled, the striped, they're going to be yours. And he took that option to Laban. The Lord set it up so that it should have been an easy decision for Laban, but Laban chose a battle of the cons, and he got what he got. But what we come to find out there is that the Lord was actually behind this. Was it the whole stripe thing, the whole stripe stick thing that was working? No, I don't really think that really helped. And we have one of two options here on what we can believe is happening. Number one, either the Lord spoke to Jacob and said, I'm going to give you the spotted, speckled, and striped lambs and kids of the goat. And Jacob decided to go out in his own and try to help the Lord out in, listen very carefully, because I know I've given you a lot of negatives about trying to help the Lord out. But he tries to help the Lord out in a way that does not interfere with what the Lord is actually doing. This is not like the Sarah and Hagar and Abraham thing. This is him trying to constructively help through ingenuity, through creativity, and through effort in a way that would not interfere with the Lord and cause God's will to be done in a way that was harmful or different. Not as good as what the Lord wanted. Now, it could be that. It could be that the Lord somehow spoke this to him to do this thing, to take these sticks and strip some bark off and leave some strips of white on them and throw them. It could have been all the Lord. The Lord could have told him, you do this and this will work. But here's what we have to understand. Either way, what Jacob was doing would have had no effect on the birth of those sheep if it wasn't for the actual power behind this, and that's God. And I think this is a really good picture of what it looks like to work for the Lord. Sometimes I feel like as ministry workers, we're kind of just throwing striped sticks down. We are doing the best we can. We are thinking of whatever we can think of to help the Lord and to do the work in a way that doesn't interfere with Him. That's fine. But really, our efforts are so small, I don't think we really understand the full extent of how small our efforts are in the work of God. Jesus, as you know, put it like this. He said, without me, you can do some things. Without me, you can do a little bit. No, you know, I can't fool you. You know the scriptures. He said, without me, you can do nothing. And I think if you're a healthy worker for the Lord, this is how you'll view your work. It's like throwing striped sticks down. And if the Lord does not engage in that work, if the Lord doesn't intervene, nothing's going to happen. And if you're in that place, it's a healthy place, because then when the Lord is using your ministry effectively, you're not going to be worshiping yourself over the striped stick stuff. You're not going to be worshiping yourself over, wow, that study came out really good. And why not? I put 21 hours into that study. I'm doing pretty good. That song came out really well. Why not? We practiced it. I don't know, what did you guys practice this week? Saturday? Or last week? Saturday? Friday? Whatever you practice. Thursday. Yeah, why not? We practiced Thursday. We get to feeling too good about ourselves. We miss the big thing that's happening behind the scenes. You can see it any time in the New Testament when someone was working with the Lord. The disciples passing out bread that was miraculously multiplied by the Lord. And that miracle was happening right there at their fingertips, but, well, they weren't doing it. Again, they were counting to 50, they were counting to 100, they seated people, they grouped them, they organized them, that's all they did, and then they took and they passed out the bread and the fish. Turning the water into wine, what did they do? They took a jug of water that the Lord had miraculously blessed and turned into wine. It wasn't them. They had their parts. Their parts were so small without the power of the Spirit behind the work. And I just hope we always know that. If we always know that, Lord, I'm doing the best I can, but I know That if you don't engage with me, if you don't meet me in the work, if you're not the power behind the work, then what I'm doing is going to be extremely ineffective. And Lord, when I see what I think is effectiveness coming from the work that I'm doing for you, I know immediately who to credit. I know it's not me. I know it's not my striped sticks. I know it's not my meager efforts. It's the power of your Spirit in the work. You know, a really good example of that sort of thing, I think, is when we let our young kids help us work on stuff. You ever do that? Take your young kids and you let them help in the kitchen, or you let them help build the shed. And what are you really doing? You're fixing whatever they mess up. It's probably going to take you twice as long to do it because that little helper is slowing you down. You may have to redo all of the work. But why is that better? Because if you're a parent, you know that's better. You know that feels amazing to get that little kid out there. Your little kid, your little boy, your little girl, get them in the kitchen helping, or get them out there working in the garage or the shed helping. Even though they're slowing you down, even though they're not really adding much to your effort, why does that feel so amazing? Because it's your kid. And you see your kid, you love your kid, you see your kid pouring his or her heart into work because they love you. And that is where the reward is. And I think the Lord is the same way with us. We get out there, we do the little bit that we can. I think it's smaller than we think it is. We do what we can. We give it our best effort. And the Lord gives us those little parts. The Lord will tell us, get involved, get invested, do these little things. And I'm going to bless that because He wants to work with us. I think this was all part of the plan for Jacob. This is God wanting to work with Jacob, wanting to cultivate more faith in Jacob. You know, for God to speak to Jacob, this was a dream, by the way, Genesis 31. For God to speak to Jacob in a dream and tell him that this is how this is all going to unfold. And for Jacob to actually go and do it and not think, Lord, this is really crazy. I don't know what I ate last night before bed, but boy, that's a weird dream. And Lord, I don't really think you'd tell me to do that. You know, like the Jericho thing. How are we going to defeat Jericho? Here comes Joshua. I just heard from the Lord. What did He say? We're going to do a lot of marching. At the end, we're going to shout. And then we're going to win. Stuff that doesn't make sense to us. But yet He does that to get us involved, to work with us, to partner with us, to teach us faith, to build our character. That faith is huge. That's going to help Jacob to trust the Lord. He's getting experience hearing from the Lord and talking to the Lord. All great things that the Lord can use. And Jacob was just simple enough, and I don't mean simple in a negative way. He was simple enough, single enough of heart that he could just say, okay, Lord, let's do this. I'll do the stick thing. Whatever you want, Lord, and I believe that when I leave this place, you're going to give me every single sheep and every single goat that you want me to have. Great lessons from these stories of Jacob. We'll take a look at Genesis 31 next week. Would you stand with me? We'll close in a word of prayer. I just love the Old Testament. I really do. You know, in the New Testament, you have a lot of doctrine. I love that stuff. I love digging through the doctrines of the Bible and all the complexities that's there. It stretches my mind. It tests my mind. It makes my mind expand. It makes my heart expand. But what I love about the Old Testament is just to see Christian principles all over the stories that we read in those Old Testament passages. I love the Old Testament. I always have. I hope you're enjoying these Old Testament studies. I hope you're learning from Jacob. I hope you've learned from Abraham and Isaac. I hope these stories are giving you something that you can take out into life and just let rip with your faith. Just do it with your faith. Trust that the Lord put this stuff in here because it's going to work for you too. So let's pray.